I'm Christina Jimenez. I'm a therapist at Courageous Healing. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have also worked for another organization here in Fort Wayne that has helped provide free therapy for Latinos that are underinsured or uninsured. And I have been with them for almost 2 years, and I just started at Courageous Healing not too long ago, made that transition. So yeah, I recently graduated and I recently got my license as a clinician here in the state of Indiana. I am trauma trained, so I have training in EMDR, which is eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing. So it is a style of therapy that people do, therapists can do if they are trained to do so, to help people with trauma, either past or current trauma. So I will be talking a little bit about that later on in the slides, but I do want to tell you a little bit about my background as a clinician, as an actual therapist. So I'm trauma informed and culturally aware. I have a lot of experience working with predominantly Latino clients because previous to Courageous Healing, I worked for a small organization here in Fort Wayne that helps the Latino population by offering them free therapy if they're underinsured or uninsured. So I worked for them for a really long time before I moved to Courageous Healing. I am bilingual, and because of that, I have had the great opportunity of working with youth and teens, a lot of kids, a lot of young adults. So I have worked with them in group settings, and I've worked with them one-on-one in individual therapy. Like I mentioned, I'm trained in EMDR, and I have some experience working with people that have suffered through domestic violence and sexual assault, because another fun fact about me is that I also worked for the YWCA of Northeast Indiana for 3 years. Yes, so I'm a jack of all trades, but I'm only a master of one. And that's still kind of being worked on. Not quite a master, trainee. So we'll go ahead and review the learning objectives I have set up for us. I posed them in a question format because I thought that'd be fun to kind of have those questions bouncing around in our heads instead of having this official learning objective that's very wordy. So I asked 5 questions, 2 questions and a couple of statements. What is trauma? Who has trauma? How trauma affects us? Healing from trauma, and then some resources. So that's going to be the pathway that we're going to be taking today, discussing trauma and what exactly that is and understanding some of the concepts around that. So I invite you guys to, in your heads, start thinking about what you would consider to be trauma. Just imagine either an image or a word. Maybe you can remember a memory. You don't have to share. I'm just helping bring up that image or that thought because we're going to be discussing what it is. Trauma for a lot of people is different. There's no one set definition. So because there's no set definition, I picked something that a trauma therapist called Peter Levine said. He defined trauma in a way that I found really profound. So I want to share that with you all. So Peter Levine describes trauma as anything that our system can't handle or process. It is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. Because to me, the metaphor that came into my mind, the image that came into my mind, was a drop into a puddle. Dropping a drop or dropping a stone into a puddle and the ripples. An event happens, right? And then there's consequences that ripple out, whether they be good consequences or bad consequences. Sometimes it's a positive thing, right? We get a promotion at a job. The ripples are higher standard of living. Maybe we get to move to a different part of town that's better for commuting or better for our children to go to school. So we get all of those positive things. Or it could be the other way, where the event is something that is hard for us to deal with, like a house fire. And now the ripple effect is we're dealing with homelessness, trying to figure out insurance things, trying to figure out what housing looks like now, where to live, how to transport yourself to and from work. So those are some of the things that I thought of when I thought about trauma. There are different types of trauma, and I wanted to highlight some of them. This is not a comprehensive list. I know it's a huge list, and you're like, wow, is there more? Yeah. there's more. Because like Peter Levine said, it's anything that our system can't handle. So if we are overloaded, if our window of tolerance is overloaded and we can't deal with what's happening, that can be traumatic for us. That can push our system into overdrive. And that's not a fun feeling when you're always on edge, just waiting for chaos to happen, or you're depressed, hopeless, feeling helpless. That's not a good feeling either. That's what trauma can do. So these are some of the examples. And then here's the question: who has trauma? Based off of all of those examples you just saw on that list, in our minds, let's try to imagine what we think the face of trauma looks like. Just hold that for a second in your minds. Everyone has trauma. Like Janet said, anyone can have trauma. Regardless of age, education level, socioeconomic status, regardless of your race and ethnicity or your family history, it does not matter. You are possibly experiencing or have experienced trauma at some point. There are different kinds of trauma. So there's acute trauma, which means it's like a one-time thing that happened and it was traumatic and it was a lot. So think of like being held at gunpoint. That's a one-time incident because it doesn't happen every day, does it? That's a thing that was really profound and made an impact, but it's not something that will happen, hopefully, multiple times in a lifetime. With chronic trauma or complex trauma, that is trauma that happens a lot over time. So for that one, you can think of domestic violence as that one. Domestic violence happens repeatedly over a period of time, reinforcing that traumatic response in that person. So they are constantly being traumatized and re-traumatized over and over again in the circumstance. Anyone who has been a witness to or personally experienced trauma could experience traumatization. So just because you weren't the person that was directly affected by the trauma doesn't mean that you can't be traumatized by hearing about things like the shooting in Nashville, the school shooting. For some people, watching those videos is traumatizing. It's extremely traumatizing because they don't know how to deal with those feelings that come up, the fears that come up. So that ripple effect, the event happens, the ripple are the consequences. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Raise your hand if you've heard that word before. It had its moment during the pandemic and a little bit before the pandemic. It was a hot topic. A lot of people were discovering what that was, what exactly how that applied to life, what that meant. What do you guys think the adverse childhood experiences is? What is ACEs to you? Don't cheat.
Divorce. Yeah.
Divorce.
Family.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, may I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah.
Is this what used to be called at-risk kids? Or is this different?
It's different. I think ACEs, and it was a Kaiser Foundation survey that was done during the 90s. So I believe Kaiser did their thing first, and then that has informed and created further studies since then. Because there's like protective factors one. Instead of adverse childhood experiences, they have protective childhood experiences now too. It's like the opposite. So I think that this has made a lot of things kind of pop up. Yes.
I think adverse childhood experiences is a listing of things that could have happened to us when we were younger and then giving it some kind of quantitative weight to say, and then if you get enough of these to equal a certain number, you're really adversely affected. A way to quantify some of the stuff that happens.
Yeah. What do you think?
And to follow up on that is then that can often predict adult outcomes. A lot of it related to like health issues or poverty and that.
Yep, the long-term effects of these adverse childhood experiences. Yes.
Similar to the 40 developmental assets,
Mm-hmm.
that you would compartmentalize some ideas of the traumas or the incidents, the situations that happened, and then what the effect is later on.
Absolutely. So 40 developmental assets are really useful as if you work in social services. Highly recommend those, especially if you're working with children. But the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire focuses on 10 questions that evaluate 5 personal aspects of our lives, and then 5 aspects that are related to others. And I'm actually going to show you the 10 questions that they ask, just so we can like silently reflect, because I don't want to like put anyone on the spot and be like, oh yeah, how much trauma do you have? Which one did you say yes to? It's a lot in front of people. I don't know how familiar you are with each other, but I feel like that's not something to unpack, during a conversation like this. Here are the first 4. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but a lot of these are things that you don't really think are something that would be adversity maybe in our brains, because we think sometimes adversity is like super intense and like neglect or abuse, but it can also look like some of these things.
Yes, I would like for you to think about the conversations we have been privileged to hear about in the last 5 weeks. And can you place in any of these categories or under these questions a face that we have heard from? I'm thinking of last week because we had 2 very different stories, or 2 weeks before that, I mean. I think it's fascinating to see how the faces of trauma have changed for us and where they might fall in under these categories.
Absolutely. And we might even see our own face in some of these questions as we're reading through them. It helps, what I was telling Janet earlier, is sometimes the ACEs questionnaire helps us reframe some of the things that we have experienced in our life. So instead of looking at it as like, oh, bullying is normal, everybody goes through bullying. Now you're like, that's actually traumatizing, because I didn't know how to handle that situation. I didn't know how to deal with the feelings that it caused. Like, to me, that experience was not normal. It was not something that everyone experiences, because for me, it felt very isolating. It felt very vulnerable. It felt very overloading and overstimulating. So as we're reading through, keep in mind these things. I don't want to rush anyone. Is anyone still reading? Because I will keep my hands to myself until I get to click the button. And traditionally, these are just yes or no questions. This is how simple the questionnaire is. You just say yes or no, and then you add up your guesses to see how many yeses you have, and that reflects. Out of 10, that reflects how adverse or how much adversity you've had to face based off of the categories it evaluates. Because it doesn't evaluate everything. It evaluates those 5 specific categories about you and 5 specific categories about others in the home. Okay, here are the last 6. Yes.
Quick question on number 7.
Yep.
That's very specific gender, and given the fact that statistically, that's probably why it went that way. Has there been any discussion about kind of ungendering it, if that's even a word? Because there are males that also are put into that position that then also have to deal with the whole toxic masculinity part of, then they're additionally bullied because they got hit by a woman. So is number 7, any thought of changing that word?
Yes. So the original Kaiser study had that specific wording, had the female mother. It said mother, not even stepmother. So stepmother was recently included. And even more recently, they have ungendered that question. I put the original one just to give you, to ignite that exact conversation, because it's important. Back in the 90s, they didn't think to talk about battered men, but they used that language. Battered women was a category, or battered mother specifically. They didn't say battered parent, battered caregiver, they said battered mother. So I thought that was really interesting that back then they were thinking in the right line, like the right direction, but like they weren't inclusive of all the possibilities. Because it could be a battered caregiver that isn't even a parent. It could be like a guardian that's being battered. And that effect is still the same for that child. It's the exact same thing. So I'm glad you asked that. Yes, they have since then changed the wording to include, what was it? Something about a caregiver. They use the word caregiver. Was your caregiver ever? And then like they list off to make sure that the person knows that it could be guardian or parent, whoever's in charge of that child.
Grandparent.
Aunts and uncles, yes.
How about 10? If the answer was yes, my parent was in the state reformatory, the answer is yes. What if my parent was in and out of the school repeatedly over time? Would his answer still be yes?
Yeah. And every occurrence is traumatizing.
So you were asking though, jail versus prison, because prison
Right.
having a different,
In the county jail versus the state reform.
so
Yeah.
incarceration maybe.
And they use incarceration. In their original study, was your caregiver or parent ever incarcerated? And that's one of the 5 questions that are to do with other people. I'm glad you asked. But yes, every occurrence, whether it's jail or prison, is traumatizing to a child. Great questions. So how does trauma affect us? Well, trauma affects us in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's more obvious, like physical effects, and sometimes it's psychological effects. We're going to discuss both. I've seen both in a lot of my therapy sessions. I've had a lot of clients that actually have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or qualify for that diagnosis based off of their symptoms, just what they're experiencing. And a lot of us might think, well, isn't PTSD something that the veterans deal with? You know, people that come back from war and they hear fireworks and they, have a reaction. That's not always the face of PTSD, especially now with the world changing so much. Like, absolutely, they do experience PTSD, but there are other people that are not veterans of war that can also experience the same effects. So some psychological effects are listed on this slide. Again, I'm not gonna read them off all at once, but I do want to point out a couple of them that I think is really important because they don't seem super obvious to us at times. The first one being dissociation. That's just a fancy word for saying that you disconnect yourself from reality. And it is our brain's way of protecting us. It's a protective instinct. We're not intentionally doing it. We're not saying, you know what sounds fun? Disconnecting from reality. No, it's our brain saying, you know what? We're a little overloaded right now. We don't know what to do with what we're experiencing in this moment, so we're gonna check out. And that's when people will describe things like feeling like they're in a dreamlike state, feeling like the world is kind of muffled. They are there, they feel their body there, but they don't feel connected to the moment. They just feel like life is happening around them, but they're not really involved or plugged into that. I've also heard people say that they don't even feel like they're a part of their own body. They feel like they're watching themselves perform life. They're watching themselves at work, but they're like having this out-of-body experience of like, I don't feel like that's even me. Even though I know it's me cognitively in my head, I can see that that definitely looks like me, that's me, but I don't feel like I'm actually the one doing that. The other one I want to bring up is, it's the changes in attention, concentration, and memory retrieval. Sometimes PTSD can look like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A lot of the times, there's some similar symptoms like the memory stuff, being very forgetful, blanking out. I've heard people say that, oh, I lost my train of thought, and then they just can't retrieve that anymore. Something's going on in their brain. Now, some of us are forgetful by nature because, as we get older or we have a lot on our plate and we're trying to juggle way too much than we probably should, something's gonna slip through the cracks. So I'm not gonna say that every memory thing that you have, that you're like, oh, I forgot that thing last Tuesday, I have PTSD. No, maybe you don't, but maybe there is something there in other instances in your life where you feel like you can't remember like your childhood memories. I've had a lot of clients say that. I can't remember anything between grades 3 and 7. That's 4 school years they don't remember at all. And a lot of the times it's because their brain is trying to protect them by saying, you know what, we're not going to touch that. We're going to close the door to those memories and we're going to lock it and we're just going to throw away the key. So getting in there is a task. You have to break down the door. But yeah, changes in attention, concentration, and memory retrieval. It makes it really hard to focus on like reading. It makes it really hard to focus on watching TV, watching sports in person, or even a conversation. Sometimes you feel like you're zoning out in the middle of a conversation. I've heard clients also tell me that with their attention span, they need novelty, a lot of it. They need to just do the next thing really fast. So some of them will multitask because it keeps their mind busy. Otherwise, they can't sit and just stare at a screen for a long period of time and like just do one thing. They have to do multiple things. So you see how that's similar to ADHD? A lot of people with ADHD do the exact same thing, where they need that newness. Another thing that I want to bring up are the mood swings. A lot of people will come in panicking and saying, do I have bipolar disorder? Because I swing wildly from happy to sad, and it's scaring me. Sometimes trauma can create that response, because we get so used to pushing the sad stuff, the negative feelings down, you don't really give it time to breathe or time to like exist. So you keep push, and that's when you swing wildly from being happy to all of a sudden something small that you're like, what? Why did that movie even trigger me? Why am I now crying about some silly romantic comedy I just watched? Why is this happening? The mood swings are because something is bringing up some past stuff for us, and that's why we have those mood swings most of the time. And then not being able to like help ourselves deal with those emotions, not knowing what to do when they come up, so we keep trying to push them down, creates more mood swings sometimes. That emotional dysregulation is what it's called, when we can't help ourselves feel our feelings. To feel is to heal. I tell a lot of clients that. To feel is to heal. If you don't let it talk, it will force you to let it talk. That's where we get a lot of anger, because people get so angry, but it's not really anger. If you dig down under that, there's sadness, there's hopelessness, maybe some helplessness, frustration, maybe they're a little annoyed. There's a lot of other things under that, under the mood swing. Then we have, let me see what other one I wanted to point out. The guilt or shame component. Feeling guilty or shameful for whatever it is that happened. Well, you know, this thing happened to me, but it was really my fault. I used to hear that a lot with domestic violence work. A lot of the people that would experience domestic violence would be like, well, if I would have done this differently, if I would have said that instead, if I would have went to sleep, if I would have woken up earlier, if I would have, if, they play that if game all the time. But that's because of that guilt and that shame that was underneath their experiences. They felt like I have to have contributed and created this situation for myself. This person is not a bad person. I'm the bad person. I have to be the bad person. I have to be the one that's wrong. And a lot of people that experience trauma feel that way. Something's wrong with me. That's why that happened to me. The lies our brain likes to tell us sometimes, right? The stories we create sometimes can be really kind of sad and deconstructive stories that tear us down instead of building us up. So there's that emotional component too of the guilt and shame. Here are some physical effects of trauma. Sometimes our feelings, when we don't let them talk, they will talk to us through our body. Stomach aches, back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, all the pain, knee pain. Sometimes our body, it gets so tired of us ignoring things that it will start throwing curveballs at us, physical curveballs. And then we go to the doctor and we're like, doctor, oh man, I feel like my stomach just hates me all of a sudden. I can't eat anything that's like spicy or anything that's like greasy because my poor stomach. And your doctor's like, oh yeah, you know, you probably have some issues. Let's go check you out. They're thinking only medical, but then sometimes there's some psychological stuff underneath that that's creating that, because our bodies are only meant to deal with cortisol, which is a hormone that is released during stressful situations. That's the fight or flight stuff. Cortisol is one of those hormones. We're only supposed to have cortisol released in our body for 20 minutes, elevated cortisol levels. Think to a couple of times in your life where you have had stress that seems to never end. Maybe it's right now. Maybe as you're listening, you're like, this is stressful. This is going to be longer than 20 minutes, so we're already on the wrong track. We're setting ourselves up for some of this stuff. But when we have elevated cortisol levels in our body, it starts tearing down some of our systems. It takes away nutrients, it uses up our storage stuff that we have for like minerals in our body, other vitamins that we have, because it's trying to figure out, okay, what do we need? It's kicking into fight or flight. It sees a threat. Even if the threat isn't real, even if it's not like a lion snarling at you from a corner and you're like, oh my gosh, the lion's right there. Sometimes the lion can be something like your boss telling you, hey, deadline, right now, 4 o'clock, get it done. You're like, oh. Our brain doesn't know how to tell the difference. It kicks into fight or flight regardless. And that's when we get some of this stuff, like the jumpiness, startling easily. Nightmares are really common. Really common. Not being able to sleep, another really common one. I've heard people tell me that they had sexual dysfunction. I know that's an awkward topic to talk about in public, but that is a thing that sometimes can happen. Either the person has a difficulty wanting to engage that way, or they constantly need that connection in that way to feel like that oxytocin boost, because a lot of us, when we engage in that way, will release dopamine and oxytocin, which are happy drugs that our brain releases. Happy, I don't want to call them drugs, but like our receptors in our brain send those out and they make us happy. They make us feel calm and soothed and okay, and it bonds us. So that's why we look for that, because when we don't have it, we're on the opposite side of that. We're like panicked, not feeling good, not feeling ourselves. Like the Snicker commercial when the person's like being a terror. You're like, here, eat a Snicker. Chocolate has been proven to release dopamine, so they're not wrong. Eat a Snickers next time you're mad. We also have appetite changes. So are any of you like emotional eaters? People that eat when they're like upset? Okay. What about people that don't eat? You lose your appetite. You don't even know. You're like, food what? Oh God, can't eat anything. I can't stomach it right now. We have the opposite. Sometimes we have both, depending on the emotion. If we're sad, we'll eat our feelings. If we're going through like grief or loss, we might be like, ugh, I can't stomach food right now. I don't want to eat anything. It just depends, but those appetite changes can also be a sign that something's going on. And those are easy signs that we can recognize in each other even. Especially if you spend a lot of time with each other. If you always go to lunch with your friend, then all of a sudden your friend isn't eating, something could be happening. Whether it's traumatic or not, that's up to them to decide, but that's a little red flag that you can look out for and be like, hey, you haven't been eating as much as you usually do. Like you usually enjoy having lunch with me, and like you eat more than what you're eating. What's going on? Then we have excessive alertness, which is called hypervigilance. You're on edge all the time. The way that I describe it, it's like having a guard in your head that lives in a guard tower. And that guard tower, he's trapped in there. Like he's just on high alert, like 360 turns all the time. He has a sniper gun ready. He's just watching. Any threat, anything that happens, he's ready, he's alert. Just waiting for the next thing so he can spin around and take care of it if he has to. So the excessive alertness, sometimes, like I said, our brain can't tell the difference between what is an actual threat and what's just like something that's creating some discomfort, something that's annoying, something that is not pleasant for us. It can't always tell the difference, especially if it's gone through trauma, because it's already learned that when something bad happens, something worse is usually behind it. So we got to be ready, just in case. So now your guard is like running on no sleep, spinning around in a circle, ready for anything. But that excessive alertness sometimes isn't necessary. I've had clients tell me that they've had that experience. I'll tell you an actual example. I had a client go to the Disney on Ice thing in February with her family, and she was on super high alert. Her guard was like spinning around in a circle with the sniper rifle ready, and just the whole time she couldn't even enjoy the show because she was so on edge. She couldn't relax. She felt tense. Her muscles were tense. She was shaking. She was just ready. And there was no threat there. Just, fun characters on the ice, having a good time. Her kids were having a ball. They were like, oh my gosh, this is great. She couldn't enjoy it. She was on that high alert. Her body hasn't learned. Certain spaces, certain things don't require that. You can relax, put the rifle down. It's okay. Breathe. We don't need you right now, Mr. Guard Man. Let it go. But hers is like ready to go all the time. So that's what the physical effects can look like. Any questions about the physical or psychological effects before I move on? I don't want to zoom past it and not let anyone ask questions. Okay. Healing from trauma. So just because you've gone through some stuff doesn't mean you can't heal it and move on. Sometimes we can find power in what made us feel powerless, believe it or not. So let's talk about what that looks like. Movement and exercise, human connection, asking for support, helping others, and working with your feelings. Those are the core things that most therapists or people will try to get people that have experienced trauma to do. Let's start with movement and exercise. Because it feels like everything, that's the solution for everything, right? Just move your body more and, go outside and breathe some air. You're like, okay, how's that going to help me with trauma? It helps train your nervous system. So like I just mentioned with the guard and the guard tower, your nervous system is on high alert sometimes, waiting for the bad to happen all the time, expecting the worst, creating scenarios in our heads about all the horrible things that are for sure going to happen, and then none of them happen, and we're like, nope, not this time, but next time. So we stay on high alert. Movement, exercise, they help us create a healthy cycle of endorphins and dopamine in our bodies. And it helps push back against that cortisol, that stress hormone, helps push back against it because dopamine is a good one. We like that one. It's a nice one. That's the one that helps us feel good. The endorphin also gives us like that push of like, I feel really good. I'm going to push harder and exercise. I'm going to run faster. I'm going to do all the things. And it's giving us that burst of energy. That can also feel good. Endorphins are also something that some foods can help us experience too. So with movement and exercise, you're retraining your nervous system. See, we're okay, we're safe. We're doing something that helps us feel good. You see, we're in public, we're exercising, and this is nice. Nothing is dangerous here. I am okay. And then slowly, our nervous system will start understanding, okay, the guard in the guard tower can go take a nap. It's fine. He doesn't have to be on high alert, not sleeping ever. He can go lay down now, take a rest. We don't need him right here. Then we have human connection. I have a very strong philosophy that humans heal in relationships. And I'm not just talking about romantic ones. Any relationship that we have with other human beings that is beneficial and healthy to us can help us heal. Friendships, clergy, church members, the cashier at the grocery store that always checks us out, that's very nice and kind to us, even that small little interaction can help us heal. You don't have to sit down and have long-winded conversations about all your trauma with them. Those small positive interactions can help give us perspective, can help us feel connected and less alone with our problems, can help us feel supported. And those are things that as human beings we need. It's one of our core needs. We like to feel loved and we like to feel like we belong. And that starts from a really young age.
There's a lane at Kroger for that now. Did you see that?
Yeah.
There has been a designated lane at Kroger for people who want to take a bit more time and chat with the cashier.
Now that is really cool.
Previously, I have been behind that person. I'm not kidding, it's really a thing.
Which Kroger?
We all should go to this field trip. I think that sounds like a field trip opportunity for us for the next season. But human connection can help us heal, and then we have support. Asking for support can sometimes be really scary. There's a lot of fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being dismissed. A lot of my clients have said, I fear that if I share this with my people that I go to church with, my friends, my buddies at church, or at this party when I see them, that they're gonna be like, oh, you're fine, it's gonna be fine, everything's gonna be great, it'll be okay, don't worry about it too much. When that person really feels like it is, it's important enough to be bothering them, so they want somebody to see that. They want somebody to validate that, to say, yes, that does sound awful, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's happening to you. I see what you're going through, I see that struggle. Can you tell me more? Right? They want to hear that. And sometimes we don't do a very good job of it. But it's something we can practice, that empathy. Empathy is different from sympathy. A lot of people get those mixed up. They're like, oh, it's the same thing. Sympathy is when you're like, oh, I'm sorry, that sucks. Poor you. That doesn't feel very good. Those belong at funerals. Sympathies belong at funerals, right? My deepest condolences. But you don't tell somebody that because they're, having trouble at work. Oh, poor thing. That doesn't feel validating. The person wants you to listen, wants you to connect. Human connection. Asking for support can also look like therapy. Actually engaging in that deep work of how do I help myself? Maybe friends and family can't because, they love us and they want to see us okay. And our problems and our feelings make them feel uncomfortable and they don't know what to do with it. So they're like, That's why there are professionals who get paid to do that, get paid to deal with your problems and help you sort through the chaos and figure out what to do with it. So asking for support is not bad. It doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you any of those things. That's a really common thing that I hear. I should be strong enough to handle it. I'm mentally weak if I can't handle it. Are you mentally weak, or is your system just overloaded and you're a human being? Because you're a person. You're not made out of steel. You're not a robot that can just keep going, right? Oh, nothing feels. I don't feel anything. Yes.
Well, and if their family is the reason or the perpetrator for the abuse, that's the least safe place they're going to go and want to look at. Which then if they model other people are going to be like my family, that's going to shut that door for asking for support.
Yeah.
Particularly if they've been told you're worthless and nobody's going to listen to you because nobody cares for you. We don't care for you.
Or hearing a really common phrase.
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah, the get over it one, or everyone has problems. Everyone's depressed. Everyone has anxiety nowadays. Well, that doesn't mean that they really don't experience things that are hard for them. That doesn't mean just because everyone, quote unquote, has all of these things nowadays, doesn't mean that makes that person's struggle any less of a struggle. You can tell them that until the cows come home, but they're still gonna be like, I still feel this way. I don't feel good. And you're not helping. So, yeah, asking for support. It's a very valid point. Sometimes the source of our pain is not the adequate or the place where we should be trying to heal. Yes. Sometimes it is if the person's willing to change and like open up that safety. But if it's not, we need to heal somewhere else in a different environment, which would be like therapy. Or whatever that looks like for you, whatever safety looks like. Because safety can look like a lot of things for a lot of us. But safety is what helps us, give us opportunity to start working on that deeper stuff. Helping others. So it has been proven that when we help others, when we are philanthropic, when we do things to help someone, even if it's just one person, it helps us feel better about ourselves. Has anyone ever been in a situation where you're trying to help a stranger and they're telling you problems that kind of remind you of your own, and you're telling them like some tips and tricks to help them through? Then you're like, wait, maybe I should take my own advice. Like, whoa, I didn't know the answer to that? Huh. That can help us sort through that, because other people's problems feel a lot less overwhelming than our own. It's like a puzzle sometimes that we get to play with. But then our own, it's like, I don't know what to do with it. It's too crazy, it's too chaotic, it's too much, it's too overwhelming. So helping others can help us as well. Even as a therapist, honestly, I'll be honest with you guys. As a therapist, sometimes my clients help me more than I think I help them. I just walk away like, whoa, that was a crazy session. And I learned more about me than I learned about them, but by golly, I'm walking away with a lot of like takeaway, a lot of good stuff to move forward with. Then we have working with your feelings. This is the other hard one. So asking for support is hard, and then working with the stuff is hard too. I love metaphors, so I'm going to use them a lot, as you could probably already tell. I love my metaphors. But sometimes our trauma feels like a long hallway with a bunch of doors, where a lot of traumatic like events are behind those doors. Having to walk down that hallway by choice and open those doors one by one, and then deal and face with the things that are inside of those doors and those rooms is not easy. It's not. Not knowing what to do with the feelings that come up with that, also not easy. Not fun. Not for a lot of people anyway. Sometimes people like the challenge. But for most part, people don't like doing that. It's not like a fun weekend thing to do. But it's important, working with our feelings, knowing what exactly we're feeling first. A lot of people think about their feelings in a thinking way, not a feeling way. Well, I feel this way because of all of this stuff. They know how to explain their feelings, but they don't know how to actually feel them. I'm sad because blah, 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 blah. Okay, but you don't look sad. You're not crying, you're not exhibiting that sadness in a physical way. You're only thinking about it. You can talk about it, but you can't feel it. Feeling it is important. Whatever it is, happy, sad, mad, annoyed, irritated, all the things. It's important to let that have its moment, because it's going to keep coming up. Like I mentioned, it's going to keep bubbling up. The more we try to hush it and tell, shh, no, go away. We don't need you right now. Nope, don't want to hear you. Nope. The more it's going to keep getting louder and louder and louder and louder until we have things like depression, anxiety, stomach issues, back issues, all the issues. Our needs are going to be hurting now, and we're like, oh my gosh. It's that trauma from when I was a kid. No, I'm just kidding. But working with our feelings, it's necessary. It's a part of that journey. It's an uncomfortable part, but learning how to be uncomfortable, and you don't have to love it, but like being okay with it, being at peace with where you are is important. And that's what a lot of people do in therapy. They learn how to be okay with what's making them feel not okay. So some resources. I have some books for you guys. I feel like books are probably the easiest way to like get information and connect dots, because not a lot of us want to have these conversations with like friends or family, especially if some of those connections actually were the beginnings of what we're now dealing with. So I have a bunch of them that I really love. I have 5 out of the, like, how much are these? 8? 5 out of 8 of them. And they're all really great reads. They can help us, give us insight, help us understand others. Because as human beings, we sometimes think that everything's about us and about what we've gone through and all me. But sometimes hearing somebody else's experience not only helps us understand our own, but helps us understand humanity and the people around us and how we all are literally in the same boat with different oars. We all have different paddles, but we're all passengers of the Titanic, and it's sinking fast. So here are some books. The one I highly recommend, and I've had multiple clients read, The Body Keeps the Score. I've been harping on this concept a lot, this conversation. But our body will remember. If we don't want to remember, or if we bottle it up, or we close the door in the trauma hallway and like leave it in a room and we think it's gonna be back there and not bother us, and we're gonna turn off the light in the hallway and like run away. No, the body will keep the score. And that's when we have the physical symptoms popping up, the mental health symptoms popping up. Because the body remembers. Whether or not you want to acknowledge that the brain also remembers, who cares? Your body will, and it will tell you loudly. So I highly recommend that book. The What Happened to You book is also really similar and really powerful as well. I think both, if nothing else is taken away from this, those 2 books are really good. And I saw that the series had an addiction presentation. In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts is about addiction and coming into contact with addiction. This is a doctor that wrote it. He worked in Toronto with people that were addicted, highly addicted. And he talks about his experience and how he had to change his mindset as a doctor from like villainizing people that were addicted to understanding what pushed them to decide to use drugs to deal with their problems instead of other ways. What history they had, what, difficult lives they've led, what trauma they've had. So highly recommend if you want to understand addiction better and you want to address some of your own like negative thoughts about it, maybe that'll open your mind. Oh, somebody taking a picture. Before
I had a question for you about another book, and you had a quote from him from the beginning, but Peter Levine's book, In an Unspoken Voice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have feelings about that? I mean, I think The Body Keeps the Score has sparked so many extraordinary conversations and awareness, but there's also so many things. There are a couple layers, right, to Vanderbilt himself and then to some of the other conversations. But again, having something that is so solid that people can be talking about, I think is worth so much.
Absolutely.
But there are some other responses, I guess, to books and things like that. And one of the things that was on our shelf, my husband's a therapist, so he had Peter Levine's book on there. And there was I had read something about how that's an answer to or another layer to some of the things addressed in Vanderbilt's work, and I really loved that book, and I just didn't know if you had any thoughts or feelings about that piece or that book, especially with trauma. It's kind of a specific question, but I'm curious about that. Or what
That's a great question. There are 2 books by Peter Levine that I think are excellent books, Waking the Tiger and In an Unspoken Voice. And I can repeat those again. In an Unspoken Voice and Waking the Tiger. Great work. Peter Levine is the author. But I feel like the accessibility, who can read them, who can digest what is on those pages, is very specific. And that's why I don't name them off and like tell my clients, here, read this book, because it's a lot. The Body Keeps the Score is a lot, but it's more storytelling. It's more like, here are some real life stories of real life people that helps us understand why the body keeps the score or how the body keeps the score. And then here's a little bit of like education about the body and like the nervous system and stuff sprinkled in there. Peter Levine's work is very intense. And I feel like it's for like therapists or people that are in social work that help other humans because of the words, the way that things are explained. It almost feels like you're reading a textbook in a way. So that's why I don't recommend it for just anyone to read. Like Joe Schmo, like, here, Joe, read this. I wouldn't unless Joe has like some understanding of what might be in there.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. So it dovetails with all of this, and it's in the sphere, it's just, okay.
It's just a little bit more intense
Yeah.
than what most people could handle. And that's why I always say Body Keeps the Score is good. It's accessible, it's easy to read, it's not hard to keep up with. Peter Levine's work is excellent. So if you do have social service background and you have psychology interests, like if that's a hobby for you and you enjoy like watching or reading or listening to things around that, Peter Levine's work would be excellent. Great question. Some other resources are these different types of therapies that are specifically for trauma treatment. This is for people that nothing else has worked for them, or people that just want to tackle. They're ready to like open those doors in that hallway on purpose and start tackling them one by one. Because this is not your typical therapy when it's targeted specifically for trauma. Like, you have to be ready. And if you need help getting there, the therapists usually help you get there before they dive into things like EMDR or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. With EMDR, just to briefly explain it, they're trying to stimulate both sides of our brain. The brain that likes to think on an emotional level and the part of the brain that likes to think on the logical level. But there's not that much talking in EMDR. They're stimulating these sides by what's called bilateral stimulation. Bi means two, lateral means sides. So they're stimulating both sides of your body, your left and right side, through movement with your eyes, by making you follow somebody's finger or like a dot on a screen. Everyone's tools are different. I use my hand because I think it's easier. But they stimulate your eyes so that you move, and that stimulates both sides of your brain, both hemispheres. That helps you process through the trauma and connect dots without you having to connect them verbally, without having to talk about the trauma verbally, and having to dig into that dark closet of trauma. Your brain does the work for you. Our brain naturally heals, has that natural instinct. Sometimes it just needs a little push. That's what EMDR is, that little push, that gentle nudge in the right direction. Healing is this way. And then our brain's like, okay, and it starts going on its own. So that's what EMDR is.
Christina, I once had a therapist describe EMDR to me. This was several years ago when it was not as common to talk about as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I feel like EMDR helps my clients take a red light experience that can feel crippling and take it down to maybe a yellow light where I can acknowledge that the trauma happened, but that I can move through it and still function and make decisions and live without it disabling me. Do you feel like that's an accurate description for that particular strategy?
That is a very good description for that. I wish I would have thought of that. So thank you. You gave me something else. I'm going to use that now from now on. But yes, it takes something that's really debilitating and makes it easier to deal with. It's not like you're not happy-go-lucky skipping around going, yay, this is happening, let's deal with it. No, you might hesitate a little bit, that yellow light, you yield at yellow lights, right? So you might hesitate and be like, uh-oh, I know what this is. I recognize this. But instead of you freezing or not knowing what to do or being overwhelmed over what's happening, you're able to keep that logical side of your brain online longer. And that logical side is what gets us through. That's a problem-solving instinct. When we're under traumatic situations or stressful situations, we go into that fight or flight, and fight or flight is not logical. Not logical. That's why sometimes people that are in fight or flight make some really crazy decisions, and we're like, huh? Why would you make that decision? That is not a sound decision. What is going on? But for them, in the moment, their only thought is survival. Must make it through this. It's not, what are the options? Let's weigh them. Let's see the pros and cons. No, their brain doesn't go through that process. It goes, okay, what's going to help us live? Again, our brain doesn't know how to tell the difference between real threats and what we think is threatening, what we feel is threatening. So, excellent way of describing it. Yeah, it helps us take that edge off. Yes.
So we're talking about trauma that has happened and somebody is trying to process through. But what happens when you have something like CPTSD? We deal with people on a regular basis who have lived through trauma, I'm sure you do too, that have lived through trauma that's major trauma, and that particular instance of trauma may have ended, but they are in a situation where every day is a new trauma, and they're still living through those new traumas, and those old traumas haven't healed yet. So it's very hard to process through those old traumas because we're continuing to not even re-traumatize, but experience new traumas. And what we're finding is that talk therapy is extremely ineffective.
Yes.
Just because like the cognitive bandwidth necessary to have a conversation
It's not
about
there.
it just isn't there
Yeah,
because
they're in survival mode.
Yeah.
And EMDR is great for this too, because what happens with the EMDR is they map out all of your traumatic situations, and then your brain we like categories. Our brain loves to put things in nice little neat boxes. So anything that's even vaguely similar, it's like throw it in that trauma room over there on the left. Throw it in room 1. That's where stuff that's like that are in there. Trauma room number 2 has this type of trauma. Trauma room number 3 has this other one. So it associates certain traumatic incidents to a specific category. So EMDR, when we map it out, we call it mapping. We ask you, what's the earliest traumatic incident you can remember? Or what's the earliest incident where you remember feeling helpless, feeling unworthy, feeling unlovable? The earliest memory you have. We start there. That's called a touchstone. And then from there we map out other experiences that are like that. What are some other experiences where you felt unlovable, unworthy, not enough? And that helps us create what's called a neural network. When we start touching on one, even if it's a current one, it helps with the past. Because your brain likes categories, and it's like, oh yeah, if we're working on this one and this one is being healed, then that gives us permission to work on the other stuff too. And your brain is like a computer doing background work. On the screen you see one thing, but in the background it's doing all sorts of other things to make whatever's on the screen happen. Same thing with our brains. It's working in the background. We're dealing with this thing right now, but we're gonna work on the rest of the stuff in room 2, not just that one thing, because everything's similar. We're similar enough to us, so we're gonna work on it in the background, and it helps heal. So that's how that would be appropriate for CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, where people are constantly being re-traumatized all the time, like domestic violence, for example. Because they're literally being traumatized every day.
A little bit of a follow-up to that. Have you found that some things that maybe have not typically fit into the therapy world, that are maybe a little bit out of the box, have been part of the solution? Things like massage therapy, or do those types of things help or hinder? Do they fit into the solution at all?
Absolutely. So going back to those strategies that helps us heal, human connection is one of them. Massage therapy, there are so many people in this world that are sleep deprived, touch deprived, sleep deprived too, obviously. Here I am with memory issues. But touch deprived, where they don't have that like positive human touch. So having massage therapy can help that person feel that human connectedness without having to like ask for a hug or ask for hand holding or ask for affection of some kind. That's because it's not physical affection, it's for a purpose, but it helps that person heal and it helps that person's nervous system accept positive human touch again, especially if they have trauma. You work to it though. You don't just send somebody that's been through like sexual assault and be like, here, go get massage therapy. No, do not recommend that. Get them ready for it first, prepare them first, so they can start slowly accepting positive touch. But then it does help heal. So yeah, we at Courageous Healing, we take a holistic approach. We look at the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, because all of that is what makes us who we are. Not just our mind, our body keeps a score, so how do we help our body heal too? How does spirituality fit into this? Because that's a source of strength for a lot of people. I've had so many clients that are very spiritual, and that is like their support system. They turn to God in times of like trials or in times of stress, in times of trauma, they turn to God. And that's not a bad thing, especially when it's coupled with other supports. That way that person can really have like this wraparound feeling of being wrapped around in a nice blanket. It's a nice therapy blanket, a nice massage blanket, or a nice whatever physical healing blanket, and then spiritual as well. Great questions. Let me see. We'll talk about Courageous Healing a little bit so you know that we are a resource in the community, just so you can understand what we do. So we are located on South Anthony Boulevard, on the south side of town. We are culturally centered, which means that all of our therapists think about culture in the way that we think about your problems. We take that into account. We don't just look at you and be like, oh yeah, you're just like everybody else, cookie cutter solutions, here you go. No, we take into account all of the things that make you who you are. Part of that is our culture. Regardless of if you're from a different background, doesn't matter. We have a lot of minority therapists. We have, I think, 2 Hispanic clinicians, including myself, and then we have majority African American clinicians, and then we're working to grow that, expand that network even bigger than that, to include more people that are culturally centered and realize how that plays a role in our mental health. Because it's not just tough life stuff, it's how does all of this add up to create the concoction that is our life. We do outpatient therapy, so one-on-one therapy, individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, group therapy. We do those types of therapies. We also have a massage therapist that is helping us help people heal their body, and she is amazing. She's a great person. She tries to make us a really safe and healing space. While she does that, all of our therapists are trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and we're able to deal with all of the stuff that could potentially be making somebody struggle. And there's a giant list on here. This is like a wall of text. I'm not going to read all of them, but like depression, anxiety, relationships, work-related stress, you name it. If you're struggling with it, don't know what to do with it, you're like, okay, I'm done looking at this. This is driving me crazy. Here, help. We can help. We have 5 pillars that we try to focus our therapy and our practice around. That is culturally centered care, which I already kind of harped on a little bit. Trauma-informed providers, accessibility, safe spaces, and advocacy. That is what we try to put all of our 5 pillars in everything that we do as much as possible. So let's start with culturally centered care. I'm not going to spend too much time because I already talked a lot, but we want people to know that we see them. We see them, we hear them, we want to help. We see them for who they are. We don't see them just as a human, we see them as everything that makes them that specific human being. and then we use that to help them through their care at Courageous Healing. Trauma-informed providers. So all of us are trauma-informed. We have a lot of EMDR trained therapists. I don't even know how many. I can't even count them. I think almost all of us are like EMDR trained or some other trauma-informed therapy. So one of the things that we really focus on, we want that to be accessible. So in order to make it accessible, we want to have as many clinicians that have that training as possible so we can make that easy to access to people. Speaking of accessibility, we believe in health equity, and we center a lot of the things that we do and the ways that we do things on that health equity. So what that means is we have a sliding scale that people can get help paying their therapy sessions with. If they're uninsured, we have that. And our sliding scale fee starts at $5. And that's income dependent. But we have grants that have helped us fund that specific purpose of being able to make this therapy accessible to people. And then we also have 3 insurances that we take. And I'm currently working on more. But if you know anything about insurances, they're not very easy to handle and deal with because they're not very nice. And they're like making you jump through hoops. It's like the Olympics for insurance. So yeah, we do have some things that help us make that accessible. Let me see. Oh, we also offer virtual, which a lot of our clients do use. We have a lot of clients that aren't able to make it to the building for whatever reason. So in order for them to keep access to that care, we make sure that we make it confidential, HIPAA compliant, and accessible to them with virtual sessions. Safe spaces. So as human beings, we love safety. We like feeling safe. Because with safety, we flourish. We can focus on fun stuff like art and music and creative stuff and growing with our own needs and wants instead of just focusing on survival mode all the time. So what we try to do at Courageous Healing is create that safe space. We have a lot of really cool sitting rooms, or sitting areas, I should say. Our therapy rooms try to feel safe and accommodating. It doesn't feel like a therapy office, or we try not to make it feel like a therapy office. Comfy couches and comfy pillows and stuff. And then we have relaxation rooms that are specifically intended for that person to be able to have a moment to be with themselves, reconnect, wind down, before or after session. It just really depends on the clinician, on the person that's sending them to these rooms. But they have that opportunity to kind of recenter and ground themselves before leaving or before entering a session, especially if they're like triggered or dealing with a lot of emotion and they just need a moment. They have that moment in those relaxation rooms.
Can I interrupt you
Yes.
just very briefly? Could you help us identify this space, this church, from when you walked in the door? How can we create figuratively and literally safe spaces where we interact with one another?
Yes. So I feel like we should probably have spaces in the building where there is water features. And Janet actually Janet mentioned that. And that's so funny that you asked me that question because I was thinking water features are very peaceful. I heard you have a garden here, which is excellent. Gardens are peaceful. That gives opportunity for people for reflection and reconnection and grounding. They're excellent for grounding. Highly recommend. The windows are a really positive thing too about this building. Natural light can help us. We get vitamin D from the sun, and that helps us with our mood. That helps with things like depression. It's not a fix-all. Don't think that just because you're going to go sit on the sun when you're depressed, it's going to fix everything, but it helps with the dopamine in our brain and the serotonin, which are things that kind of help regulate our mood, help us go from happy to sad and all that stuff in a regular, more balanced way than when we're depressed. But yeah, water features. Gardens inside of the space, I would just say, well, haven't seen the whole building, but cathedral or areas where there's just the ability to be silent or to connect, or some place where that invites unity, because we need that human connection. So like this space right here, it's not really super inviting for connecting with each other, because they're facing me, so they're connecting with me and only me. But maybe like a space where we can kind of connect with each other, comfy couches, like a lounge area would be very ideal, so people can chit chat and there's no pressure of like, okay, we have to sit down in these like hard chairs and like listen to someone. Like, no, we can just sit down on this couch and say, hey, how's your day going? How are you doing? What's the weekend looking like for you? That human connection opportunity. But water features are very useful.
I promise, Pastor Ernest, I did not pay her to say that.
It's just actually really funny because they are soothing and they can help people ground, and it helps quiet the anxious mind, the overthinking. So that's why I said water features. It's not just because they're pretty, but because it helps soothe someone that is dealing with a lot of anxiety and a lot of anxious thoughts or overthinking. So,
Thank you for that.
of course. Advocacy is also another key component of how we do our services. So we like to speak up and fight against factors that are contributing to racial disparities in the community and in the state, because the founders, Aaron and Janelle Lane, have gone around and done speaking engagements to try to promote that. So we're not just all talk and like dealing with what comes to us just because we're culturally centered and all that stuff. We actually go out and try to advocate and do the work of like helping others figure out how to support different people, how to be culturally centered too, in a way, and how to be more open and accepting and understanding what exactly bias and all that stuff looks like. Because it's not this evil demon thing that's like, we're all racist. No. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes we all have these belief systems inside of us that have been formed from the various sources around us, experiences in life, media, the people that we've been used to being around, so that their advocacy work, our advocacy work at Courageous Healing, is to help understand where we come from and how we can move on in a more positive, inclusive direction, in a nutshell. So if no one has questions, oh, never mind. No, but this is my contact information. I have my email and my name here. Our website is here, our phone number, and then our address. If you're curious and you want to stop by, that's what our building looks like. Well, not the grass part, because you know, it's just now turning into spring. But the building is on South Anthony.
What is the rest?
2013 South Anthony Boulevard.
Is there literature over here about your?
I wish there was. Our marketing director was supposed to come, but she had a conflict last minute. She wasn't able to bring the stuff. I'm sorry. I do promise though that I will bring some to the church.
That would be great.
Yes. So there is some accessibility to that information.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yes.
Didn't expect it to happen.
Do you know where Links is?
Yeah.
It's right there, but
Okay, just
used to be the Fort Wayne Housing Authority
Well,
years ago.
Yes, and then Jack Vory owned it for a bit. Go ahead.
my question is this, and I could expand to other cultures, but specifically, could you speak to, kind of describe things that are trauma producing, particularly the Hispanic, Spanish-speaking culture?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones is acculturation stress, because immigrating to a different country is traumatizing in itself. And then sometimes the way that they immigrate to the United States is even more traumatizing. So that's definitely a really big one that I've seen. And a lot of the Hispanic clients that I've talked to, they don't even think about that as a traumatizing experience. They're like, oh yeah, you know, I went through this thing to get here, you know, I was held at gunpoint or whatever, but it's fine, I'm fine. You're like, are you really fine? Are you sure? Because that sounds extremely scary. And now they're like struggling with anxiety and nightmares and dreaming dreams about guns and stuff. And I'm like, oh, and you're fine, huh? Really? Your dreams are telling me something else, but all right. So that's acculturation stress is really big. Navigating raising children in the United States when they have grown up in a different culture. A lot of all Hispanic people that are from Hispanic countries, Spanish-speaking countries, are collectivists. So they value family above anything, and they really prioritize that. And they really love warm family, and no boundaries. Literally, boundaries don't exist. They're like, boundaries? What? No, we're family. We don't believe in that. I'm like, yes, we should believe in those. But that's what I've noticed with them. They struggle with that. They struggle with navigating how to raise an American child when they themselves are not typical Americans with the same values as Americans, which is individualistic values. Yeah. Here in the United States, we focus more on like the self and how we can get ourselves to a successful place, but we don't really focus on like family and putting that first. We put ourselves first a lot of the times. And for a lot of parents, that's hard to wrap their brains around that, because they're like, that's selfish. Family. And the kid's like, no, I want to be successful too. So, yes. Yes.
You said something earlier, and I'd love to hear you kind of expound or talk a little bit more about it. You said we need to practice empathy.
Mm-hmm.
How do we practice empathy? What does that look like?
So there are two components to empathy. There's something called shared emotion, where we are able to feel the feelings of another person. Not literally, because you're not going to feel the exact same thing, but you're able to feel like, wow, they're sad, so now I too am sad. I too feel the sadness emanating from them, and now I'm like, upset with them. And then there's the component of being able to put yourself in their shoes and actually understand why they feel that way. Not just identify what they're feeling and say, oh, that person is sad, or that person is annoyed, or that person is frustrated because their eyebrows are furrowed like this. But also being able to say, okay, if I was that person, if I was in their shoes, not literally, figuratively, how would I feel? How would I respond under this situation? And then being able to say, wow, that was me. I'd probably feel the exact same way, or I'd feel this way, or I feel that way. But that helps us understand the person, understand their experience. Some of us use it for not good things when we try to put ourselves in their shoes, because we're like, oh, I'd be fine. I'd suck it up and move on. Okay, maybe you would, but what could make this so important to that person where they feel unable to move past it? We can ask ourselves that question. That's that next layer to the putting yourself in their shoes. If I would be okay, or I think I would be okay, what would make me, or help me understand what is so important about the situation that the person is now affected? And that's that empathy component. We don't think that hard. A lot of the times we're like, oh, okay, another thing to do. I don't feel like solving your problems. Move on. Because sometimes it feels like a task. We're like, oh my God, here's this person with this problem. Now I have to fix it. They're going to come for me for advice. Empathy.
So
They're human too.
I hear you saying that curiosity is a very important part of empathy.
Absolutely. Curiosity is a very important part, because that's what is going to help open the doors to conversation. A lot of people don't have those conversations because of fear of judgment, fear of being told, get over it, it's fine. So if you're like, what would be so important about this to make them feel like this? And then asking them, can you tell me more about what you're struggling with? Can you help me understand what's going on for you? That, powerful. Being in the moment with them, even sharing their emotion, can be powerful. Because like the Peter Levine quote said, let me look at it again because I don't have it memorized. A compassionate witness, I believe it said. Look at my water. Empathetic witness can be powerful. Having somebody see you, see your pain, sit with your pain with you. Not try to fix it, not try to slap a solution, not try to slap a Band-Aid on it. Just be there, exists with you, human to human, can be really powerful. That in itself is healing. That in itself, it's that human connectedness part that we need as people to heal. Great question. Any other questions? I'll stick around if you want. So I can ask more questions if they come up. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
We are very grateful to you, Christina, for helping us to open some of these doors. I want to thank Rebecca Karcher. I would like to thank Rebecca Karcher for introducing us to Courageous Healing and for its importance in our community. But also thanks to Rebecca for being side by side with us. This series, helping us to establish relationships with our community partners who can help each of us be more empathic, aware, sensitive, respectful, loving, to our neighbors. And as part of our Lenten journey, we wanted to do something that gave us some tools to accompany one another more like Jesus in a way that helps us to see the humanity of all of us in our respective stories. No two of us are the same. However, no two of us are terribly different either, in that we all struggle. None of us escapes life without trauma or hardship or sadness or pain. So if we can help people to know that they are heard and seen and loved, then maybe that can be part of our Lenten journey that we take forward from this one. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you for your awesome questions.